Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict in Ukraine, where the Russians several days ago started their major spring offensive operation, and just during the previous 4 or 5 days the Russians improved their position significantly along the border between the Chernihiv region and the northeastern parts of the Kharkiv region. So lots of changes were recorded in this area. But before we start this discussion, before we start talking about the changes on the ground, first of all, I would like to discuss another massive attack that took place overnight between the 14th and the 15th of April of 2026. And this map was published by pro-Ukrainian sources this morning, and according to this map, we see that the Russians used hundreds of drones to attack the territory of Ukraine. The Russians, it seems, used at least 4 missiles of Iskander type, and according to information we have, the Russians most likely used Geraint drones of the 5th generation. So the Russians didn't use, let's say, hundreds of drones of the 5th generation, but obviously maybe several dozens of drones of this type were used by Russians overnight. According to information we have, explosions were recorded in the territory of the city of Dnipro in the Odessa region, around the city of Kharkiv, the city of Sumi. Lots of explosions were recorded, Bela Tserkav, Cherkasy. So lots of towns and cities of Ukraine were attacked by Russians. The Minister of Defense of Ukraine this morning stated that overnight the Russians used 327 drones to attack the territory of Ukraine. And when following and summarizing everything that was published by monitoring channels, we can say that there were at least 3 or even 4 waves of attack that were made and launched by Russians. Everything started at 12 a.m. Everything started at 12 a.m. in the area of the city of Kharkiv, and this is exactly the territory and the area where we start receiving first updates that the Russian drones crossed the border between Ukraine and the Russian Federation. And the first drones, according to you can see, were flying to the west of the city of Kharkiv. The Russians were trying to outflank the settlement of Kharkiv from the west and to attack positions, warehouses, ammo depots of Ukraine to the south of the city of Kharkiv, around the settlement by the name of Mirefa. And during the night we received lots of updates about the situation in this region. When the Russians finished with positions, with air defense positions and ammo depots, warehouses, fuel depots to the south of the city of Kharkiv, then the Russians launched the second wave of attack. As for the city of Kharkiv and as for the previous nights, lots of explosions were recorded, and this video was published by pro-Ukrainian sources. Here we can see lots of explosions on the territory of the settlement of Kharkiv overnight. So either these are attacks of drones or maybe the work of air defense. But once again, the Russian drones entered the territory of Ukraine in this region, and according to information we have, the Russians were trying to attack, and they were flying, and the biggest number of drones was recorded exactly around the settlement of Mirefa, which is located to the south of the city of Kharkiv. And here we have some oil depot, some industrial zone. This territory used to be this territory was attacked several weeks ago, but it seems that the Russians once again decided to attack this territory. So when the Russians finished with the Kharkiv defense layer, they began attacking, and they began moving their drones in the direction of the central part of Ukraine. And this time we are talking about hundreds of drones that were launched from different directions, and the Russians began approaching the central part of Ukraine. So as you can see, lots of drones were recorded. Another batch of drones was launched from the area of Crimea in the direction of the city of Odessa and the southern parts of the Odessa region. While the Russians were moving in the direction of the central part of Ukraine, lots of explosions were recorded on the territory of the city of Sumi. Either the Russians were attacking warehouses, ammo depots, or probably the Russians were trying to suppress air defense forces of Ukraine. So as you can see, somewhere at, according to information we have, somewhere at 3 a.m. of the Ukrainian time, we saw this picture. Hundreds of drones, mainly in the central part of Ukraine, and from these positions, from this territory, the Russians were deciding where to move next. As for this wave attack between 1 a.m. Between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., lots of explosions and lots of videos were published from the area of the city of Sumi. Lots of updates about explosions were recorded from this area, and here we can see how special services of Ukraine were trying to stabilize the situation in the area of the city of Sumi this morning. So lots of explosions were recorded, and I would like to remind you that the Russians are currently advancing along the border with the purpose to shorten the distance to the city of Sumi itself. As for this attack, the biggest number of drones was flying from the area of the city of Sumi, and the Russians were moving in the direction of the central part of Ukraine with the purpose to concentrate probably several hundreds of drones right exactly in this area, and then the Russians began moving further from this point in many directions, trying to probably force the Ukrainians to probably move their air defense positions from one area to another. Another important thing, as for this attack, as we discussed during this attack between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., lots of drones attacked the city of Ismail, and this morning we have just one update, one article. Here we have a fire anomaly on the territory of the city of Ismail, on the territory of its port infrastructure, which means that most likely the Russians were attacking this territory. Maybe the Ukrainians received some cargo, some arms from the Western countries. Maybe Ukrainians received fuel, so that is why the Russians overnight attacked this territory with dozens of drones. So when the Russians finished the concentration of drones in the central part of Ukraine, the Russians began moving their drones further, and the Russians made a decision, and the Russians from this area decided to attack the city of Kiev, more precisely the territory to the west of the city of Kiev. So most likely the Russians were attacking different objects of air defense positions, energy infrastructural positions, and this wave of attack to the west of the city of Kiev took place between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m., maybe more precisely even more 5 a.m. of the Ukrainian time. And as for this wave of attack, as for this final wave of attack, we received several updates from the area of the settlement of Bela Tserkva, which is located along the road of Russian attack. We have lots of buildings and lots of constructions that were destroyed and damaged by Russian drones. Another important thing worth attention is that lots of experts are saying that the Russians are not just attacking the territory of Ukraine by coordinates. We see that there is nothing like similar to tactics just with the use of coordinates when attacked. We see that the Russians are trying to maneuver. We see that the Russians are trying to change the movement and the tactics of drones. They're trying to avoid outflank and outmaneuver positions of air defense system of Ukraine, just with one purpose, to then in the end, in the final part of the wave, to attack mainly the territory in the western parts of Ukraine, most fortified and most industrialized. So, and of course, when comparing Russian attacks with the Ukrainian attacks, they're completely different. For example, this is the map of Ukraine attack. Lots of drones were launched. The pro-Ukrainian sources reported that 180 drones were involved in an attack that took place during the previous night. But as of the morning of the 15th of April of 2026, we haven't received anything on the matter whether the Ukrainians managed to deal any damage or not. So this is the situation. These are the things that were happening overnight between the Russians and the Ukrainians. And once again, and this is a very important situation, the Russians carried out the previous night's attack just with one purpose, just one most important purpose: to support the forces on the ground to continue offensive operation. And furthermore, today, overnight, somewhere at 7 a.m., we received a report that the Russians began the strategic redeployment of their strategic aviation, and it seems that maybe today, during the 15th of April of 2026, or between the 15th and the 16th of April of 2026, the Russians are planning to attack the territory of Ukraine also with Ha-101 missiles, which means that the next night could be the night of another massive attack. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. During the previous night, we received lots of very interesting changes, and the most interesting changes are coming from the area of the responsibilities of the group of forces north. The Russians are continue advancing along MO3 and MO2 roads in the Glukhov direction, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates. This information this morning was provided by pro-Russian sources, and this is a very interesting update. According to this update, according to claims of a pro-Russian source, the armed force of the Russian Federation managed to cross the river of Loknya and to enter this big forest. Now we see that the Russians are trying to move from one forest to another, because the Russians understand that the forest, and especially a big forest, is the best place to hide and to protect infantry and troops against drones. So that is why the Russians are trying to move like from one big forest to another. Big forest also means that the Russians can concentrate forces to a critical mass. So according to this update, the Russians answered this big forest, and most likely from this big forest the Russians will advance further in the direction of the village of Yastrubshina. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Sumi direction, and probably drones, and the specific of use of drones by the armed forces of Ukraine forced the Russians to review their plans on the 2026 and probably even on the 2027s, and the Russians decided to advance in the areas where the territories and the territories around their objectives have big forests. For example, this is the Sumi forest, and the Russians decided to probably carry out their major offensive operation right exactly in this area. And once again, the main reason of this is that the Ukrainians are using drones. So what is the specific of using of drones? First of all, drones they are not very useful when talking about attacks in big forests like this one. So you can attack positions along the border of forest, but it is very difficult to imagine how the Ukrainians are planning to use drones and to attack deep inside of the forest. So the drones in this case are completely useless. The only thing the Russians need is to answer any big forest and then to continue advancing. The Ukrainians will be able to attack Russians along the border of the forest, but they will not be able to save their effectiveness when attacking deep inside of the forest. This is the first thing. Another important thing, that the Ukrainians in 2024, something like this, decided that drones is something like the most perfect weapon. So they came to conclusion that drones is the most important and the most perfect weapon. So that is why they decided to reduce everything in favor of drones. So that is why the forest, as for the Russians, is not a problem for Russians, because the Russians develop artillery systems, the Russians develop different types of artillery systems, and when talking about any forest, it is not a problem if you have a well-developed artillery forces. If you have heavy flamethrower systems like a TOS flamethrower system, or if you have just regular artillery systems, you will be able to bomb forest and to force your opponent to leave these territories. So that is why the Russians have no problems to attack in the direction of forest and to fight with the Ukrainians who are currently located on the territory of any forest. But the Ukrainians have problems with this, and the Russians decided to use the situation, and the only perfect place where the Russians can use and to test this idea is the Sumi direction, because here we have the biggest forest through the entire line of combat contact that basically protects the city of Sumi from the east. And the Russians continue offensive operation, and during the previous 24 hours additional changes were recorded, and according to information we have, according to pro-Russian sources, the armed forces of the Russian Federation improved their positions significantly on the territory of the settlement of Miropolye. Basically, the village of Miropolye was cut into two pieces. The Russians established control over the eastern parts, over the central part, and now it seems that the Russians in coming days days will finish the battle for this territory completely. The village of Miropolye is a pretty large village, which means that the Russians, when they take the village under complete control, will be able to concentrate a critical mass in this area before moving further in the western direction. And furthermore, the Russians will be able to move from one forest to another before they enter the Sumi biggest forest. So here we have changes. Once again, this is the end of the 14th of April. Yesterday we had reports from pro-Ukrainian sources about advance, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 15th of April of 2026. Maybe today the Minister of Defense will also confirm this information. Now let's talk about the Kharkiv direction. I would like to remind you that just yesterday we received lots of updates from the Pechenegi water reservoir, how the Russians were attacking the dam with the purpose to probably destroy the dam and to ruin the Ukraine's logistics in this area. And today we received several reports that the Russians managed to improve their position significantly once again along the forest, along the border. So these are the changes on the ground between the dates. So the Russians improved their positions in the big forest to the south of the settlement of Marina. It seems that the Russians are about to take this big forest under complete control. The Russians improved their positions in the forest to the south of the settlement of Krasne. Additional territories were taken by Russians, and now we see that the Russians control up to 50% of this forest, and the Russians improved their positions to the east of the settlement of Vovchansky Hutory, which is a part of the Vovchansk agglomeration. So these are the changes, and according to these changes, we see that the Russians most likely in coming days will be able to take under complete control the territory along this red line. And this is already something like complete control over the border from this part of the Kharkiv region along the river of Volcha. And from these positions, and when the Russians take under complete control the river of Volcha, we believe the Russians will destroy the Pechenegi dam, the Pechenegi water reservoir dam, and then the Russians will begin their major offensive operation in the northeastern parts of Kharkiv region with the purpose to establish complete control over the territory from the cities of Kupinsk and Volchansk. We're talking about this red line. But who knows what is going to happen with the river of Seversky Donetsk when the Pechenegi water reservoir destroyed. Maybe the Russians from these positions will try to continue offensive operation even in the direction of the city of Kharkiv, because everything that is happening here right now is very, very suspicious and very, very strange. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Dnipropetrovsk direction. Here we have another area with significant changes on the ground. So according to information we have, the Russians improved their position significantly to the east of the settlement of Velika Mikhailovka. And the Russians have not just improved their position significantly, the most important thing is that the Russians crossed the river of Volcha. So this is another river of Volcha, but this time in the southern parts of Ukraine. And this is the river, and according to information we have, this river used to be served as a natural barrier between Ukrainians and Russians, and the Ukrainians were using this river to protect their towns on the Ukrainian side of the river between the settlements of Velika Mikhailovka and Gavrilovka. But today several pro-Russian sources stated that Russians managed to recapture the settlement of Alexandragrad, and furthermore the Russians managed to cross the river of Volcha and to take once again under complete control the forest to the east of the settlement of Velika Mikhailovka, which makes the Ukrainian drones maybe not 100% useless, but not so effective as if the Russians were advancing through fields and open space. So as we can see, the Russians, it seems, the next stage of the special military operation, the spring and the summer military campaigns, will try to stick as close as possible to these big forests, and they will try to advance exactly through the territories where we can find big forest. Another important thing is when talking about the entire territory of Ukraine, of course, the biggest forest and the biggest area with significant number of these natural barriers is located in the most northern parts of Ukraine. We're talking about the Chernigov region and the most northern parts of the Sumi region, which means that if Russians test these tactics along the line of combat contact in these areas, and if they understand that this is a solution against the Ukrainian drones, of course we should expect the Russian offensive operation in this part of Ukraine as well. And that's it for the short video. The Military with Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.